From the News Channel 5 Network, this is Morning Line with Nick Barris.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on Morning Line. Nick Barris here with you on a Thursday. And today will be the last day of the Republican National Convention. We've had a week worth of that. We had a week worth of the Democrats last. And so we're going to talk about it now, as we did just last week on Thursday as well, about how things played out. So we're fair with both parties and get a good evaluation of how things are going leading up to what's going to be a major election just not too long from now. Get out and vote, get it going. So what do you think? We're going to get the phone number up there. You're invited to join in the conversation and share what you've observed, if you've watched, if you want to make comparisons or how you think things are playing out. And to talk more about this, professor from over at MTSU, John Weil. Good morning to you, sir. It's nice to have you with us.
Good morning. Great to be here.
Well, here we are again. We had the Democrats last week, of course, and again, virtually this time around, for the most part, you have the Republicans doing their thing. And, we're in the books now with tonight. You know what's interesting? Tonight, we're going to have the president at the end of the evening give his speech and formally, personally accept the nomination for the Republicans. But what's interesting is we've heard from him almost every single day to some degree. And whereas with the Democrats, Joe Biden was at the end, as it typically is the case. But with this president, we've had a little bit of Donald Trump, I think, every single day, haven't we?
We have. And, one of the factors that's sort of emblematic of that is the fact that this is the first time, in my knowledge, since the 1830s, that a party really hasn't adopted a political platform. The platform is essentially Donald Trump.
Isn't that interesting? And I think we've all said that. I mean, I don't know. And I don't know if many of our viewers agree. Yes, we know he's a Republican, but I've said this before. He's almost an entity unto himself, and I think that's an example of it. There's not necessarily a Republican platform that he's a part of. It's kind of like the Republicans are part of the Donald Trump platform. It's a different way of doing things.
Yes, it is. And, one of the other things that's really fascinating, and some say is in violation of the Hatch Act, which doesn't seem to be enforced very regularly. But, this is the first time where you have a president basically conducting the campaign from the White House and, the convention, rather, from the White House. And, to my knowledge, it's the first time we've ever had a president, using the pardon power as sort of a photo prop during a convention. And he did something similar with the naturalization ceremony.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about that and the Hatch Act. It's been brought up, whether or not what he's doing here is right, wrong, or in violation of the act. The common line of thinking is that the White House is the people's White House. Yes, you're going to have a Democrat or a Republican in there, but that it represents all of us. Once that president's there, he's there for all. And it's I don't know, it's supposed to be separate from politics, I guess. Is that how it is? Which makes me wonder, how the heck do you separate that anyway? But under the Hatch Act, what's really the meaning behind that? Why do you think that's in place?
Well, it's basically designed to make sure that individuals in public life are not pressured by those above them and don't, use the perquisites of office as a way of perpetuating their own power. There's always been, sort of a fine line, but, within the last 2 weeks, I believe it was, I got something from MTSU basically, reminding us that we're entitled to our opinions, but that, when we express opinions, there are opinions, particularly in endorsing a candidate. MTSU's name is not, MTSU is not endorsing one or the other president, although obviously employees are going to have their own opinions.
And so will there be an investigation with the Hatch Act? And the allegation would be that the president has used official White House and office duties and kind of let them, blur over into his political campaigning in a way to perhaps benefit him politically, to show and say, hey, a lot of people think I'm not for, bringing certain folks who qualify into this country. And here, I'm doing a naturalization service. And that he's blurring it, and that it's becoming political, and that, I guess you could raise the point, the only reason he's doing it is for politics.
Yeah, I mean, basically, the administration has left investigation of the Hatch Act to, or Congress has left it to the executive department, and they're not going to be investigating themselves. I have seen that there have been some calls for, renewed look at this and possibly stricter legislation on the subject.
Okay, well, beyond that, again, the president will formally accept things tonight, and we'll hear more in detail from him, but he's been very much of this process, as has his family. What do you think about that? I mean, we do not hear, at least of late, as much from some of his family members, but they certainly came out for this convention.
They did. It may in part be a reaction to last week's convention. There was a lot of emphasis on Biden's character, people that he had called on the phone and, his family members and the like. And it was a, somewhat difficult act to follow for someone who is known more for sort of being combative and in your face. But this is a development. It's not a completely new development going, I'd say, at least as far back as the 1960 campaign, where John Kennedy was blessed for being from a large family, and had increasingly candidates use sort of family members as surrogates to, they can't be at two places at one time, but you can send your wife or a daughter-in-law. So it has been fascinating to watch.
Yeah, and Melania Trump, actually, someone who's kept, I think, a fairly low profile as far as first ladies go, decided to give it. And I guess, was that pretty much expected? Even if she didn't want to, was it kind of like, well, look, the first lady has to say something during the convention, or is that not necessarily always the case?
I think they usually speak. You may remember the last convention, she really, sort of botched up, or the people that helped her botched up, because it turns out the speech that she gave was largely plagiarized from one that Michelle Obama had given. But if you'll notice, among the speeches yesterday, or I guess it was the day before, whenever she gave her speech was a little, it doesn't appear as though she cleared it in the same way that the other speeches were. And she went a little off message, I think in a good way. I mean, she was expressing sympathy to COVID victims and that sort of thing that, for the most part had been kept out of the limelight during the convention.
Yeah, a little bit different on that. Well, let's see. Let's take a quick phone call before we have to take our first break and continue to talk about some of the other speakers and what we've seen and some of the themes that may come up and how it maybe contrasts with what we heard from the Democrats last week. But we'll go to Beverly. Good morning, Beverly.
Good morning. How are you?
Hi, good. What's on your mind?
Well, I was listening to him, and I've listened to both convictions over time. I turn them on for a while, then turn them off when I get. But anyway, Billy Graham used to go to the White House and pray with the presidents when we was in problems, and I respect that because that's what he needs to be, and it wasn't advertised. But I was thinking, and he would know, separation of church and state. Because now you have pastors, which one has disgraced himself, but another one, Billy Graham's son, comes on Facebook all the time praising him and talking how wonderful he is. And of course, me as a Christian, I don't understand how he can praise all the lies. I mean, when Mr. Graham talks, he never does anything wrong, but that's his problem.
Let's talk about the role of religion, and certainly one of the things that came up in the news was one of the big advocates for the president 4 years ago, Jerry Falwell Jr., and he's gotten himself into something of a pickle now that's, if nothing else, quite embarrassing.
Yes, if you don't mind, I'm going to
Sure.
use this opportunity. I just published a book called The Bible and American Law and Politics, and it has about 300 entries that deal with, people who have used the Bible in political discourse. I like what Beverly, was talking about with Billy Graham. Early in his career, he had something of a misstep. He visited Harry Truman in the White House, and of course, they were both Baptists. And subsequently, when he went out on the lawn, the reporter said, "Well, what happened?" And he got down on his knees and he reenacted, the prayer that he had had with President Truman. And Truman, for many years, just sort of dismissed Graham as a fake. Graham later went to his house and apologized and explained that he had sort of been taken advantage of by the media. Didn't quite understand things, but one of the most interesting things that I saw, I'm working on another book on prayer in American public life. I really liked the prayer 2 nights ago by the Cardinal Archbishop of New York, where he tried to sort of balance, he prayed for both the Democrats and the Republicans. It was one of the few occasions during the convention that was bipartisan. And he mentioned issues on both sides. He prayed for the unborn, as you would expect a Catholic priest to do, but he also prayed for immigrants and for the poor and the dispossessed. So religion can have an uplifting value in politics, but sometimes religion can be corrupted by politics. And I think certainly the example of Jerry Falwell Jr. Seems to epitomize that.
On that note, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we can take some more phone calls, and I ask our viewers for their observations or comparisons between what they've seen with the Democrat to Republican convention. And we'll ask the professor as well whether or not these conventions do anything other than maybe just try to bolster up the existing support, or if it could actually convince someone based on these conventions to vote for one candidate or the other, which is another question we put toward folks when they watch debates. Does it really make that big a difference? We'll take a break and be back with more right after this.